Some men, when you point a gun at them, they get smaller. You watch the spine go out of them, watch them shrink down into whatever's left. Cole Maddox did the opposite. I was 19 years old the day the whole town of Coldwater learned what a man will and won't put down, and I've spent 30 years since trying to write it plain, and I still get it wrong. Because the part nobody believes, the part I almost don't believe, and I was standing there, is that it wasn't the man who refused to move first. It was the wolf. So before I tell you how it ended, let me ask you something, and be honest, because nobody's listening but you. If someone you trusted handed you a rifle and an order, and the only thing standing between you and a clean life was one bullet into something that had never done you a lick of harm, would you? Stay with me, I'll tell you what I did. I'll tell you all of it. But I need you to understand the cold first, and the dust, and the dog that wasn't a dog. Because if you don't feel the weight of the thing, you'll judge it too fast, same as we all did. Let me start where it started to come apart. The morning it began, I was counting. That's a habit of mine, has been since I was small. When a thing gets too big to hold, I break it into numbers I can. 14 nails in the boardwalk in front of the jailhouse, 3 of them risen up crooked. 2 horses at the rail, one of them favoring its left fore. 11 men gathered in the street by the time the sun cleared the church roof, and more coming, which was how I knew before anybody said a word that this wasn't going to be an ordinary day. 11 men don't gather in Coldwater for anything good. We were not a town that gathered. We were a town that kept to itself and watched the road for weather. I had my ledger open on my knee. I'd started keeping it the week Sheriff Vay made me a deputy, on account of he said a man's memory lies and a written page doesn't. I think now he just wanted me out from underfoot, a green 19-year-old with more thumbs than sense, and the ledger gave my hand something to do. But I took it serious. I wrote down arrests, which were rare, and disputes, which weren't, and the price of feed and the names of men passing through. I wrote down weather. I have somewhere in a trunk in my house the temperature of every morning of my deputy years, in my own cramped hand. That morning I wrote, cold for the season, frost on the trough, sky like a washed bone. And then I didn't write anything for a while, because Cole Maddox rode into town with the wolf trotting at his stirrup, and my hand forgot what it was for. I'd seen the wolf before. Everybody had, the way you've seen a thing you can't quite swear to, at the edge of a field, in the half-dark. A gray shape that might have been a big dog and might have been something the country sends to remind you it was here first. Cole had come down out of the high pastures 2 springs back, took the old Henley spread that nobody'd worked since the Henleys went broke, and kept to himself the way men who have been somewhere bad keep to themselves. He bought what he needed and said thank you and rode home, and the wolf was always with him, and nobody asked, because in those days you didn't. A man's animals were his business. A man's silences were too. The wolf's name was Smoke. I knew that only because once at the mercantile I'd watched Cole drop a sack of cornmeal and the animal flinch back from the noise, and Cole had crouched right down in the dirt of the store and put his hand flat against that gray chest and said, "Lo, easy, Smoke, easy, it's only flour, the way you gentle a frightened child." I'd never heard a man talk to an animal like that, like it could understand, like it deserved to. That was the man. I want you to hold on to that, because in about an hour the whole town was going to decide he was something else, and I want you to remember the floor of the mercantile and the cornmeal and the word easy. By the time Cole reined up at the rail, the 11 men were 15, and they had the particular stillness of men who'd already talked it over and only needed somebody to go first. I knew most of them. Prout the blacksmith, the 2 Garraway brothers who farmed bad land and blamed everything but the land. Old Dempsey, who'd buried a wife and a daughter both and never forgiven the world for either. And in front, with his thumbs in his belt and his hat tipped back, Reed Calder. Calder ran cattle on the best ground in the valley, and a man with the best ground generally believes he earned it, which makes him dangerous when he's wronged or thinks he is. His boy Tobias was 12, had been 12. The day before, They'd pulled Tobias out of the creek below the Calder place, drowned, blue, his small hands still curled. And somebody had seen the wolf near the water that morning. That was all it took. That was the whole of it. A gray shape near a creek and a dead boy, and grief looking for a shape to pour itself into, and finding one with 4 legs and yellow eyes that didn't blink the way a Christian thing was supposed to. Cole sat his horse and looked at the 15 men, and the men looked at the wolf, and the wolf, I swear this is true. The wolf looked at the men one at a time, slow, like it was reading them, and then sat down in the dust at the horse's foreleg and stayed. It was Calder who said it. That animal killed my son. Cole didn't answer right off. I've thought about that pause more than near anything else in my life. A guilty man fills a silence. A scared man fills it. Cole let it sit, and then he said, quiet enough that men had to lean to hear, which is its own kind of power. Your boy drowned, Reed. I'm sorrier than I can put words to, but smoke never touched him. You weren't there. Neither were you. And then gentler, because even then, even with 15 men and a grief that wanted blood, Cole was reaching for the thing in Calder that was just a father. I lost people too. I know what it does. It makes you want there to be a reason. I'd give anything for there to be a reason for you, but it wasn't him. I had my ledger on my knee and a pencil gone still in my fingers, and I remember thinking, he almost has them. For one breath the street tipped toward something other than what it became. Prout looked at the ground. One of the Garraways spat and looked away. Grief is a fire, but shame can damp it, and Cole had laid his hand right on the shame of it. The ugliness of 15 grown men come to kill an animal in front of a stranger who done them no wrong. And then the jailhouse door opened behind me, and Sheriff Harlan Vey stepped out onto the boardwalk, and the day went the way it went. I owe you the truth about Vey, and it's not a simple truth, which is the only kind worth telling. He was a good sheriff. I don't mean that the way you say it at a funeral. I mean Coldwater was a hard place full of hard men, and we did not, in my years there, hang the wrong man or burn out a family or do the 100 terrible things that small towns in that country did when nobody was watching, and the reason we didn't was Vey. He kept the peace with a kind of tired, dogged decency, and it taught me what little I knew about being more than a boy with a star pinned crooked on his coat. But he had a thing in him, and I think now it was fear, though I'd never have called it that then. He was afraid of the town. Not of any one man in it, afraid of the town, the way it could become a single animal when it wanted to, 15 men into one stupid, hungry thing. He'd seen it before, somewhere in a past he didn't speak of, and he decided the only way to ride that animal was to never let it know it was stronger than him, to get out in front of it, to give it what it wanted before it took it, and call that order. So when he stepped out and saw 15 men and a stranger and a wolf, he didn't see a chance to do what Cole had almost done. He saw a fire he had to get in front of, and the fastest way in front of a fire is to throw the first thing it wants into it yourself. Maddox, he said, that animal's a danger to this town, I'm declaring it. As of now, there's a bounty, county money, on its hide and an order standing that it's to be put down. You can do it clean on your own land, and I'll call it a mercy, or these men'll do it here in the street. Your choice. But that's the only choice there is. He believed, I think, that he was saving Cole. Trade the animal for the man's life. That was the math of it in Vey's head, and it was not crazy math. A wolf is a wolf. A man is a man. You give up the one to keep the other, and any reasonable person sees the sense. The trouble was that Cole was not, by Vey's lights, reasonable, and neither, it turned out, was Smoke. Here's the thing I have never been able to make people understand about that wolf, and I've stopped trying with most. They want it to be a story about a smart dog. It wasn't. When Vey gave the order, Cole got down off his horse. Slow. Both hands where they could be seen. And he walked around to stand between the wolf and the men, and the wolf, instead of cowering behind him, instead of running, which every instinct in a wild thing must have been screaming, the wolf stepped out from behind Cole's legs and put itself half in front of him. You understand. The man tried to shield the animal, and the animal tried to shield the man. I'd been around dogs my whole life. A dog will guard you out of love and need both because you're its whole world, its food, and its God. But this wasn't that. There was no cringe in it. It wasn't a creature protecting its meal ticket. It moved with a kind of grim, considered loyalty, the way a man steps up beside his brother in a fight he knows they'll likely lose, not because he thinks they'll win, but because he is not going to let his brother stand alone. I have seen soldiers do it. I have seen, exactly twice in my life, friends do it. I had never once seen an animal do it, and I have never seen it since. Old Dempsey raised his rifle. And God help me, I want to tell you I did something good right then, but the truth is the first thing I did was nothing. I sat on the jailhouse step with my ledger and my pencil, and I froze, the way the young freeze, watching the world do a terrible thing slow enough that they could have stopped it and didn't. It was Cole who moved. He stepped square in front of the rifle, right in front of the muzzle, close enough that Dempsey could have reached out and touched the barrel to his chest. "You'll have to come through me," he said, not loud, not a threat, just a fact set down on the table for everyone to look at. "And I'd think hard on it, Mr. Dempsey, because I know you. You buried Sarah and you buried your girl, and you are not a man who wants more blood on him. You're a man who's so full of grief there's no room in you for one more drop. I see it. We all see it. Don't let Calder spend what's left of you on a thing you'll hate yourself for." Dempsey's arm shook, the rifle wavered. And Calder, who had the best ground in the valley and had buried his only boy the day before, and could not, would not, let it be for nothing, said in a voice gone raw and ugly, "Sheriff, you gave an order. He's interfering with a lawful order. What are you going to do about it?" And every man in that street turned to look at Vay. I watched it happen on his face. I was close enough. I watched him understand that the animal had stopped being the point. The point now was him, whether the law in Coldwater meant anything, whether his order was an order or just words a stranger could stand in front of. The town animal had turned its head and was looking at him now, and he was more afraid of that look than of anything Cole or the wolf could do. So he did the thing I've spent 30 years half-hatting him for, and half understanding. He drew his pistol, and he pointed it not at the wolf but at Cole Maddox, and he said, "Step aside, son. I'm only going to say it the once. I need to stop here and tell you about the smell, because that's the thing that brings it all back when nothing else will. Wood smoke from the bakery 2 doors down, ordinary as any morning. Horse and leather and the cold mineral smell of frost going off the trough. And under it, faint, the particular sourness of fierce sweat coming off 15 men, which is a smell you don't forget once you know it. The bakery kept right on making bread. That's what I think about. Somewhere 4 walls away, a woman was pulling loaves out of an oven, and the whole rest of the world was ending in the street, and the bread didn't know. And the smell of it drifted over us, while a man pointed a gun at another man over an animal. And I thought, with the strange flat clarity that comes in those moments, I will never eat bread again without tasting this. I haven't 30 years, every loaf. Cole did not step aside. He stood between the sheriff's pistol and the wolf stood half in front of him. And for a long moment the only thing moving in Coldwater was the smoke from the bakery and a single dry leaf that the wind pushed end over end down the middle of the street, past all those boots, like even the wind wanted out of there. "I can't," Cole said, and here for the first time his voice cracked just at the edge, just enough that you knew the calm had been costing him everything. "Sheriff, I have buried every living thing I ever loved. Everyone. I came here because I was done. I had smoke in the high pasture and I asked the world for nothing else, and I'd have given you no trouble till the day I died. But I am not going to stand here and let you put down the last thing on this earth that chose me. I'm not. You'll have to do it through me, and then you'll have to live in this town having done it, and so will every man standing here. That's the price. I didn't set it. You did, when you decided a dead boy needed a guilty animal more than he needed the truth." Calder made a sound like he'd been struck. And the wolf's smoke, did the last thing, the thing that broke it open. It crossed to Cole, pressed the whole length of its gray body against his leg and turned its head and looked up at him. Not at the guns. At him. And then it leaned its weight into him, the way an animal does when it's saying, "I'm here, I've got you," and it stayed leaned there and it did not look away. I have seen brave things since. I rode in a war I won't talk about. I held my own father while he died. I have a list, in my ledger and in my chest, of the bravest things I ever saw, and at the top of it, above all the men, is a gray wolf in a frozen street choosing to lean into a frightened man and stay, when every animal instinct it owned was telling it to run for the trees and live. It chose him, out loud, in front of everybody. And that, more than anything Cole said, is what hung the whole street up in the air for one more breath. Then Reed Calder, who could not bear it, could not bear the tenderness of it, because tenderness was the one thing his grief had no defense against. Reed Calder grabbed the rifle out of old Dempsey's shaking hands. And I was on my feet at last, ledger fallen in the dirt, pages flapping, my own hand on my own gun, though God knows I didn't know yet which way I'd point it. The sheriff was shouting. Cole had gone still as stone with the wolf leaned into him. Calder was bringing the rifle up, and his face, I'll never forget his face wasn't hate. That's what undid me. It was the face of a man drowning, reaching for anything, even a thing that would pull him under faster, because at least it was something to hold. In the half-second of that flinch, I learned what kind of man I was going to be, and I didn't get to choose it. It chose me, the way the wolf had chosen Cole, fast and without consultation. I crossed the street. I don't remember the steps. There's a gap in me where they should be. One moment I was on the jailhouse boards with my ledger spilled in the dirt, and the next I was standing with my hand flat on the barrel of Reed Calder's borrowed rifle, pushing it down toward the ground, my whole arm shaking with the effort, and Calder's eyes coming round to mine with a kind of slow astonishment, as if a fence post had spoken. "Get off it, boy," he said. "No, sir." My voice didn't crack this time, which surprised me more than him. "You shoot through me, you've killed a deputy. Then there's no story you tell yourself where you walk home from this. There's no grief big enough to cover that. Your boy's dead, Mr. Calder, and I'm so sorry, the whole valley's sorry, but you put a hole in me and Tobias doesn't get less drowned. He just gets a daddy in a cell or in the ground beside him. Is that what you carry to him? Is that what you bring your boy?" I have wondered every year since where those words came from. I was 19. I'd never said a true thing of any weight in my life. I think now they weren't mine at all. I think they were Cole's words, the shape of them, the way he'd reached for the father inside the mob, and I'd been close enough to catch the trick of it like a cold off a stranger. I'd watched him do it, and then, without knowing I'd learned, I did it. It worked the way it had worked for him, which is to say, not all the way but enough. Calder's arms went loose. Not surrendered, loose, the way a rope goes loose before you decide whether to coil it or hang somebody with it. The rifle dipped. And in that loosening, Sheriff Vay did the only smart thing he did that whole long morning. He stepped in and took the rifle out of Calder's hands, slow and quiet, the way you take a knife off a sleepwalker, and he passed it back to Dempsey, and he stood there with his own pistol still drawn but pointed now at nothing, at the dirt, at the dry leaf still tumbling, and he let out a breath that I heard from 6 feet away. For one beat, I thought it was over. I was 19. I thought a lot of things were over that hadn't even properly started. Let me tell you what frost does to a street, because I want you in it with me, and the cold is the part people skip. It had been a hard, clear night, the kind that comes early in that country and lies to you, makes you think winter's arrived when it's only sent a scout. The mud of the street had frozen into ridges and hoofprints, hard as fired clay, so that every man shifting his weight made a small, brittle crunch, and the sound of 15 men's nervous feet was like something eating. The trough ice had gone to slush in the climbing sun and dripped, a slow tick off the wood, and I counted it without meaning to. That's the curse and the gift of me. I count when I'm afraid, tick, tick, the drips coming about 4 to the breath, and I held to those drips like a railing while the grown men decided whether to start killing. The wolf's breath made fog. I could see it, little gray clouds at Cole's knee, faster than a calm animal's breath would be, so it was afraid too. That mattered to me then and now. It wasn't fearless. It was the opposite of fearless. It was terrified, and it stayed anyway, and there's a word for that, and the word is not instinct. I won't let anyone tell me it was instinct. Instinct runs for the trees. Smoke had every cell in him telling him to run for the trees, and he planted himself in the frozen mud against Cole's leg, and he stayed. And his breath came in scared little clouds the whole time he did it. Courage isn't the absence of the trees. Courage is the trees right there, the whole green safety of them, and you turn your back on them on purpose. I learned that from a wolf. I'm not ashamed to say it. I've tried to learn it twice more since and managed maybe once. It was the woman who broke the quiet. I should have said before, there were women in Coldwater plenty, but they hadn't come to the street, because this was men's ugly business, and the women of that time and place had 100 ways of knowing when to be elsewhere. But one came now. Came out of the bakery, in fact, the very bakery whose bread I'd been smelling, with flour to the elbows and a face like a thunderhead. Her name was Della Voss. She was a widow, ran the bakery alone since her husband's heart had quit him over a plow 2 winters back, and she was not a woman the town trifled with, because the town liked to eat. She came down off her step with a wooden peel still in one hand, the long flat paddle for pulling loaves, and she walked straight into the middle of all those guns like they were so many chickens in her yard. "Reed Calder," she said, "put your hands in your pockets before I tell your dead mother what you've become." It should have been comic. A flour-dusted widow with a bread paddle scolding armed men. It wasn't comic. Nobody laughed. Because Della had a thing the rest of us didn't, which was that she had no fear in her at all that day, none. She had spent it all already on her own graveside mornings and had simply run out. And a person with no fear in a crowd that's drunk on it is like a stone in a current. The water has to go around. "You think I don't know grief," she said. And now she wasn't only talking to Calder, she was turning, taking in the whole street, the Garraways and Prout and Dempsey and the sheriff and me and Cole and the wolf. "You think there's a soul standing here hasn't buried somebody. Dempsey, you've buried 2. I've buried 1, and it was enough to last me to my own grave. And here you all are, the whole sorry lot of you, decided that the cure for a dead child is a dead animal and a dead stranger, decided it together so no single one of you has to own it. That's what a crowd is for, isn't it? So no one man has to be the one who did it." She let that sit. Then quieter, terrible. "I knew Tobias. He came to my back door for the burnt ends every day all summer. That boy is dead, and I will cry for him tonight like he was my own, but not one of you is crying. You're hunting, and there is a difference, and your mothers knew it, and you've all gone and forgot." I wrote that down later, as near to word for word as I could get it, and reading it back over the years, it has never once stopped putting a fist in my throat. You're hunting, and there is a difference. The street took it the way ground takes rain after a drought slow, and then all at once. I watched the shame come back into them, the shame Cole had touched and Vey had buried under his order. Prout the blacksmith holstered his pistol and looked at his boots and didn't look up again. One of the Garraways said, "Lo, aw, hell," and turned and walked toward the saloon, and his brother went after him. And that was 2 of 15, then 4, the crowd animal losing its legs 1 pair at a time. And it might have ended there. I want you to know how close it came to ending there, with a widow's bread paddle and a stranger's mercy. No blood, everybody home by dark to be quietly ashamed in private, which is where shame belongs. It didn't because of the smallest thing, because of a horse. Tobias Calder's pony was tied behind the mercantile. I didn't know that until later. Somebody kind, I suppose, or not thinking, had brought the dead boy's pony into town that morning, meaning to sell it or stable it or just not leave it alone out at the Calder place to remind everybody. A little spotted thing, the boy's pride. And something spooked it back there behind the store, a slamming door or a cat, and it pulled its tie loose and came round the corner into the street at a panic trot, stirrups flying empty, the boy's own saddle on its back with no boy in it. The empty saddle did to Reed Calder what no gun, and no widow, and no stranger's words could do. He made a sound. I've never heard another like it, and I hope to die without. It came up out of the bottom of him, out of some room in a man that's only opened once, and he went down, not shot, not struck. He just went down onto his knees in the frozen mud in the middle of the street, and he reached out toward that little riderless pony with both arms like he could put the boy back in the saddle by wanting it hard enough, and he could not make words anymore, only that sound, again and again. And the street that had been a hunting crowd a minute before became 15 men watching a father break in half, which is its own kind of unbearable, and not one of them knew where to put their eyes. The wolf moved. I was watching. I was right there, and I still can't fully account for it. Smoke left Cole's leg, left the man it had refused to leave through guns and orders and a whole town's hate, and it crossed the open street, slow, low, ears flat, every line of it saying I mean no harm, and it went to Reed Calder where he knelt broken in the mud, and it did not bite him and it did not shy from him. It lay down beside him, pressed the length of its body against the kneeling man, the same way it had leaned into Cole, and put its gray head down across the man's thigh, and let the father who'd come to kill it weep into its fur. You want to know if a wolf knows what grief is? I can't tell you what it knows. I can only tell you what I saw, and what I saw was an animal that had been the target of a town's blame walk across a frozen street, and offer the man who blamed it the only thing it had, which was its warmth and its weight and the simple fact of its staying. I saw Reed Calder's hands, that had held the rifle, sink down into that gray fur and grip it like a drowning man grips the thing that floats. I saw him bend over the wolf and sob like the boy he was burying. And I saw Cole Maddox, who loved that animal more than he loved his own life, who had stood in front of a gun for it. I saw Cole let it go to him. Didn't call it back. Didn't move. Let the last thing on earth that chose him walk across and comfort his enemy, because the enemy needed it more, and Cole knew it, and that knowing cost him something I could see land on his face like weather. That's the moment, if you ever ask me. People ask which moment. There were guns and a bell and a widow and a riderless pony, and they were all of them something. But the moment was a man letting his only friend go comfort the man who'd come to kill it, because grief outranks ownership, and Cole Maddox had buried enough of his own to know it down to the floor of him. Here's where it should curve toward mercy, and for a while it did, and that's exactly where the trouble I haven't told you about yet was waiting. Because Sheriff Vay had given an order. And an order, once a town has watched it given, is a debt. You can forgive a debt, but you can't pretend it was never owed. And Vay was a man who'd built his whole life on the idea that the order is the order. That the law doesn't bend or the whole frail thing comes down. He'd pointed a pistol at Cole Maddox in front of 15 witnesses. He'd staked the meaning of his star on it. And now here was the wolf, alive, lying in the mud comforting the very man whose dead son had been the wolf's supposed crime. And every soul in that street could see that the order had been wrong from its first word. A small man in that spot lets it slide, mutters something, holsters up, lets the town go home and never speaks of it. And God help me, I wanted Vay to be a small man just that once. He wasn't. He was worse. He was a proud one who'd been wrong in public, and there is no creature on earth more dangerous than a decent man who can't bear to have been wrong where people watched. All right, Vay said. His voice had gone flat. All right, that's enough. Calder, get up. He waited while 2 men lifted the father up out of the mud, the wolf rising with him, stepping back now toward Cole, its work apparently done. Maddox, I'm rescinding the bounty. The animal didn't do it. Anybody can see the animal didn't do it. A pause, and I felt the but coming the way you feel a horse about to bolt under you. But you put your hands on a lawful officer and you stood between a deputy and his duty, and you interfered with the discharge of an order, and I can't let that stand, not in front of the whole town, or there's no point to any of us wearing a star. You'll come in. You'll sit in the cell while I figure the charge. And the animal, he stopped, and I watched him hate what he was about to say even as he said it. The animal can't come into my jail. It stays out or it goes home or somebody minds it. But it doesn't come in. It sounds so reasonable written down. That's the horror of it. Every sentence sounds reasonable. That's how the worst things get done, not by monsters saying monstrous things, but by tired, proud men saying reasonable ones. Each reasonable sentence a single stone, until you look up and you've built a wall. Cole looked at the sheriff for a long moment. Then he looked down at Smoke, who'd come back to his side and was leaning in again, scared breath fogging, eyes up on his face. "It won't stay out," Cole said. "It won't go home without me. It hasn't, not once, not in 2 years. You're not asking me to leave my dog at the door, Sheriff. You're asking me to teach it that the one time the world came for me, I sent it away. And I won't teach it that. I'd sooner not go in at all. That's not an option I'm offering." "I know." Cole's voice was so gentle it broke my heart. "I'm telling you it's the only true thing in the street. You can put me in the cell. You'll have to drag me, but you can. And he'll lie down outside that jailhouse door and he won't eat and he won't move, and in 3 days you'll have a town watching a wolf starve itself on your boards for love of a man you locked up for stopping a murder you ordered. That's the picture you'll have made, Harlan. Is that the order you want to die having given?" He used the sheriff's Christian name, soft, the way you'd say it to a friend, and I saw that land too. Vay's jaw worked. The whole street had gone silent again, the leaf finally come to rest somewhere, the trough ice ticking, and somewhere 4 walls away the bread, the endless bread. "I'll tell you the choice I made, since I promised you all of it." When Vay reached for Cole's arm to take him in, and he did reach, because he was a proud, wrong man and he could not, I stepped up a second time. But not the way I had before. I didn't put my hand on a gun. I put my hand on the sheriff's arm, on the arm of the man who'd pinned the star on my coat and taught me everything I knew about being more than a boy, and I said the hardest sentence of my young life. "Sheriff, I'll take him in." Vay turned to me. "What?" "I'll take Maddox in. He's my prisoner then, my charge. And I'm deputizing the situation, sir, the way you taught me a deputy can use judgment in the field. My judgment is that the prisoner and his animal stay together in the cell, both, and I'll sit the watch myself, and if anybody's got a problem with how I keep my prisoner, they can take it up with me." I was shaking. I want that on the record. My voice held, but my hands were going like leaves. "You gave an order this morning that was wrong, and you know it was wrong, and the whole town knows. And I think the only way you walk out of this still our sheriff is if somebody else, somebody small, somebody who doesn't matter, somebody like me, takes the wrong thing off your hands so you don't have to be the one to set it down. Let me carry it. Please. Let me carry it for you." It was the same trick again. The trick Cole taught me without teaching me. Find the man inside the role and speak to him. I was offering Vay a way to be wrong without falling, a face saving I dressed up as a young fool's overstep so his pride could survive it. I was 19, and I'd learned in one morning the most dangerous thing a peaceable man can learn, which is how to give a proud man a door. Vay looked at me for a long, long time. Something moved behind his eyes that I was too young to name then, and have named 100 times since. It was relief, dressed up as displeasure, the relief of a man being handed a way out of a corner he'd painted himself into. "You'll sit the whole watch," he said gruffly. "You don't leave that cell, not for supper, not for nothing." "No, sir." "And it's on your head. The animal does one wrong thing." "It won't." "It's on your head." "Yes, sir." He let go of Cole's arm, stepped back, holstered his pistol at last, the metal of it loud in the quiet. And then he did a thing I'll carry to my own grave. He looked at me, this proud, wrong, tired, decent man who'd nearly gotten a stranger killed over his own fear of the town, and under his mustache, where no one else could have seen it from where they stood, just for me, he nodded. Once. Small. It was a thank you, the only one I ever got, and the only one I ever needed. So I walked Cole Maddox into the jailhouse, and the wolf walked between us, and I shut the cell door on all 3 of us. because I'd be in there too. I'd said I'd sit the watch and I meant inside, and the town went home to be ashamed in private, which, like I told you, is where shame belongs. Della Voss sent over bread. Of course she did. A whole warm loaf wrapped in a cloth carried by a boy who wouldn't meet our eyes. I broke it 3 ways. I gave a piece to Cole and I gave a piece to the wolf, who took it from my fingers so gently I felt only the warmth of its breath, and I ate the 3rd piece myself, and it was the best bread I ever tasted and the worst, both. All that morning baked right into it, and I have not been free of it since. I thought, sitting on the floor of that cell with my back to the cold iron, and a wolf's head heavy and trusting across my own knee now, the way it had lain across Calder's, that the hard part was behind us. I keep telling you I was 19. Because what I didn't know, what none of us knew, what wouldn't come clear for 2 more days, when a man rode in from the Calder place with mud on his boots, and a story that turned the whole valley inside out, was the truth about what happened at the creek, about who else had been at the water that morning, about what the wolf had really been doing down by the creek the day Tobias Calder drowned, and why Smoke had been there at all, and what the gray shape near the water had actually been trying to do before grief turned it into a murderer. I had the answer the whole time. It had been lying across my knee, breathing its scared little clouds, looking up at me with those yellow eyes. The man who rode in 2 days later was named Eli Stroud, and he worked the Calder place, and he came in at a hard trot with mud to his knees and a face the color of cold ash, and he went straight past the saloon and past the mercantile and up the steps of the jailhouse where I was still sitting my watch, and he said, before he was even all the way through the door, "It wasn't the wolf. I have to tell somebody. It wasn't the wolf, it was never the wolf, and I've known for 2 days and I couldn't get my mouth to say it. I want to tell this part slow, because Eli told it fast, the way a man empties a wound, and the fastness of it nearly buried the thing that matters. So let me set it down the way I've set it down 100 times since in my own head, in order, the way it actually was. Eli had been at the creek that morning, the morning Tobias drowned. He'd been a 1/4 mile upstream mending fence, and he'd heard a splash and a child's cry, and he'd run, but a 1/4 mile is a 1/4 mile, and by the time he came over the rise to the water he was already too late, and he knew it the way you know it, in the legs before the head. But he wasn't the first one there. The wolf was. Smoke had been at that creek, yes. The gray shape near the water, yes. All of it true, every bit of the thing the town had hung its blame on. The wolf was at the creek when Tobias went under. It was in the water. Had him by the collar, Eli said, and his voice cracked clean in 2 on the word. When I come over the rise, the wolf was in the creek up to its chest in that cold water, and it had a hold of the boy's coat collar in its teeth, and it was pulling him toward the bank, digging in, slipping on the rocks, and the current had them both, and I watched it lose its feet and go under and come up still holding on, still pulling. It near drowned itself. It would have. Another minute and the both of them. And then the current took the boy out of its teeth, and Tobias went down the deep channel, and the wolf came up on the far bank and shook itself, and stood there looking at the water where the boy went, and it threw its head back in it. Eli stopped. He put the heel of his hand against his mouth like a man holding something in. It howled, he said. It stood on that bank and it howled at the water, and it would not stop. And I was running and screaming, and I couldn't get to either of them, and the boy was gone, and the wolf was howling, and God forgive me, when Calder came down and the others, and somebody said the wolf was at the water, the wolf done it, I let them say it. I was so torn up I let them say it. I didn't have the words yet to say what I'd really seen, that it wasn't a killer. It was the only thing in that whole valley that went into the cold water after a drowning child and tried. The only one. A wolf. And I let them call it a murderer because I couldn't make my mouth work, and they nearly killed it for the crime of being the one creature that tried to save him. The cell had gone very quiet. I looked at Cole. Cole was not looking at me. Cole was down on the floor with his arms around the wolf's neck and his face pressed into the gray fur, and his shoulders were going silent, and the wolf sat very still and let him, the way it had let Calder, the way it let everyone who needed it, and I understood then that this was simply what the animal was. Not a tame thing and not a wild thing. A thing that went toward grief instead of away from it. There's a word for that too, and it isn't wolf. Here is the part I've never been able to fix in the telling, because it isn't clean, and you wanted it not clean, and life obliged. Eli's story should have been a triumph. The wolf was a hero. The town had it exactly backward. There ought to be a version of this where the bell rings and the truth comes out and Coldwater carries smoke down the street on its shoulders and Reed Calder weeps and thanks the animal that tried to save his boy, and everyone learns the lesson and the bread, for once, tastes only of bread. That isn't what happened. What happened is harder and truer, and it's why I'm still telling it 30 years on instead of having set it down for good. Reed Calder, when he heard, did not feel saved. He felt damned. Because do you see what Eli's story did to him? It took away the one thing his grief had managed to build, a reason, a villain, a place to put the unbearable, and it left him with the worst truth a father can hold, that his boy was not killed by anything, that there was no villain, that the creek was just cold and the rocks were just slick, and a child slipped, and the only mercy in the whole event, the only mercy, came from a wild animal that he, Reed Calder, had then spent 2 days trying to murder in the street. He had pointed a rifle at the rescuer. He had wept into the fur of the rescuer. He had been comforted by the very creature he was hunting, and he hadn't known, and now he did, and there was nowhere on God's earth to put a thing like that. I watched a man receive the truth he'd been screaming for, and break worse under it than he'd broken under the lie. He came to the jailhouse. Eli fetched him, and he came, and he stood outside the cell with his hat in his 2 hands, turning it, and he could not look at the wolf and he could not look away from it, and he said finally, in a voice scraped down to nothing, "I owe it," and stopped. "How do you, there's no," and stopped again. And then the only whole sentence he managed, "It tried to save my boy and I tried to kill it. What kind of a man does that make me?" And Cole Maddox, who'd buried every living thing he ever loved, who'd had a gun put on him and his only friend nearly shot, who'd have had every right in the world to let Reed Calder stand there and drown in it. Cole stood up, and he opened the cell door because I'd long since stopped locking it and was just sitting the watch in name by then. And he walked out and he stood in front of Reed Calder and he said, "The kind that was drowning. Same as your boy was in the water, you were in it too, Reed, these 2 days, and a drowning man grabs whatever's near, and what was near you was a lie that felt like a rope. It wasn't malice. It was the water. I know the difference. I have been in that water myself, and I have grabbed worse ropes than you did." He paused. "Smoke doesn't hold it against you. I watched him lie down next to you in the mud when you were at your lowest. And he didn't know you were the one hunting him, but I knew, and I let him go to you anyway because you needed him more than I did. So, if the animal that you wronged forgives you, and he does, look at him, look at how he's looking at you right now, then the only one left holding it is you. And you can put it down. You're allowed to put it down. Your boy would want you to put it down." Reed Calder went down on his knees a second time in 2 days, but it was different this time. It wasn't breaking. It was something closer to praying, and the wolf came to him, crossed the cell and came to the open door and to the kneeling man and pressed its head against his chest. And Reed Calder put his arms around the neck of the animal he tried to kill, and he held on. And this time when he wept it wasn't the bottomless sound from the street. It was smaller. It was a man crying instead of a man drowning. And there is, like Della said, a difference. I have to tell you about the sheriff, because I left him in a hard place and you deserve to know. Harlan Vey was wrong, and the whole town knew he was wrong, and now the truth had made his wrong into something even larger. He'd put a bounty on a hero, ordered the death of the one creature that tried to save the drowned boy. A smaller man would have buried it, blamed Calder, blamed the crowd, found some way to make the record show he'd been reasonable. Vey didn't. He called the town to the church. not the saloon, the church, which told you what he meant by it. And he stood up in front of every soul in Coldwater with his hat off, and he said he'd given an order out of fear. He said it plain, that word fear. He said he'd been afraid of the town becoming a mob, and in his fear he'd tried to feed the mob the thing it wanted instead of standing in front of it the way a stranger and a widow and a boy deputy had stood in front of it while he hid behind his star. He said the law was supposed to be the thing that didn't panic, and he'd panicked. And a wolf and a cowboy and a baker had all kept their heads better than the man wearing the badge. And then he took the star off his coat and set it on the rail, and said the town should choose whether to give it back. They gave it back. Of course they did. A man honest enough to do that in front of everyone is exactly the man you want wearing it. But he made them choose. He made them say it out loud, so the order he'd given and the order he'd been wrong about were both on the record, owned, set down where they couldn't fester. He told me later, much later, near the end of his life, that it was the bravest thing he ever did, and that he'd learned it watching a wolf refuse to leave a man's side. If an animal can stand in the open and own what it is, he said, I figured I could too. I keep his star now. He left it to me. It's in the trunk with all my morning temperatures and the page where I wrote down Della Voss saying you're hunting and there is a difference. I take it out sometimes. It doesn't weigh anything. That's the joke of it. The heaviest thing a man can carry, and it doesn't weigh anything at all. So that's the story, near enough. But you've stayed with me this long, and you asked me at the start a question I asked you back, whether you'd pull the trigger, if a man you trusted handed you the rifle and the order and a clean life on the far side of one bullet. And I owe you the honest end of it, which isn't the part with the church or the star. It's a smaller thing. It happened years after. Cole Maddox stayed in the valley, took up proper at the old Henley place. And the town that had come to kill his wolf came instead over the years to leave things at his gate, a pie, a mended harness, a cord of split wood in the first hard freeze, the clumsy gifts of people who don't have words for I'm sorry and thank you and you showed us what we are. He never said much about it. He'd lift a hand. That was Cole. And the wolf got old. That's the thing nobody warns you about a story like this. The hero gets old. The gray went white around its muzzle and then white all through, and its hips went, and there came a winter. I was near 50 then, sheriff myself by that time, vey long in the ground. There came a winter when Cole came to my office and sat down and didn't say anything for a while, just turned his hat in his hands the way Calder once had, and I knew. He can't hardly walk, Cole said finally. Drags the back end, doesn't eat. He's not, there's no more in him, and he's hurting, and here was Cole Maddox, who'd faced down 15 armed men who hadn't flinched from a sheriff's pistol, and he could not finish the sentence because the thing he was asking for was the hardest order any man ever gives, and this time it was his to give, and there was no widow and no boy deputy to take it off his hands. I can't be the one, he said. I stood in front of a gun so nobody'd be the one, and now I have to be the one. And I can't, and I have to, and I don't know how to do a mercy that feels exactly like the murder I stopped. I'm not ashamed to tell you I went out to the Henley place with him. I'm not ashamed to tell you what we did, though I won't set it down in detail, because some mercies are private, and this one stayed mine for 30 years. I'll tell you only that we did it together, in the high pasture Cole had first come down out of, with the whole valley spread out gold below, and the wolf's white head in Cole's lap and Cole's hand flat on that gray chest. The same gesture, the exact same, that I'd watched him make on the floor of the mercantile a lifetime before with a sack of spilled cornmeal. Easy, Smoke, easy, it's only flour. Except now he said easy, Smoke, easy, it's only sleep. And the wolf looked up at him with the yellow gone milky and old, and it leaned its head into his hand, the way it had leaned into his leg in the street all those years ago, choosing him out loud, one last time. And it stayed, to the very end of it it stayed. That's the whole of what it ever did, it stayed. So here's my answer to my own question, the one I asked you at the start. I don't know if you pull the trigger. I don't know if I would, not really, not for certain, no matter how the story makes me sound. But I know this, because I watched a wolf teach it to a whole town and then watched it teach the last and hardest lesson to the one man who loved it most. The test was never whether you'd pull the trigger. The test was whether you'd stay. Anybody can run for the trees. The trees are always right there, the whole green safety of them. The test, the only test that ever mattered in that street or that high pasture or anywhere a person finds themselves with the easy thing on one side and the right thing on the other, is whether, when it costs you everything, when every instinct you own is screaming for the tree line, you turn your back on the safety on purpose and you put yourself down beside the one who needs you and you stay. Cole stayed for the wolf in the street. The wolf stayed for Cole in the pasture. And I have spent 30 years trying to be the kind of man who'd stay for either of them, and I've managed it maybe twice, and I count those 2 times the way I count everything. And they're the only numbers in all my ledgers that ever meant a thing. Cole's gone now too, went quiet in his sleep a few winters back. They found him with one hand hanging off the side of the bed, palm down flat, reaching toward the floor beside it where a dog would sleep.